Bom dia, queridos companheiros, que a
Good
paz
morning to you all. May the love of Jesus be out of us and our hearts. And one more morning, we're here, happily, gathered together in the name of Jesus to review the teachings, his teachings, for our everyday activities. And once again, we're here. Thank you all for being here, collaborating with us, the use of the masks and check the temperature and keep the social distancing. Thank you very much to all. We will be working together so that everything can be done as soon as possible. And today we'll have a morning with a very dear friend in which we did not have the social isolation. He came in Boston many times, but today, due to the impossibility of we all getting together in presence, we will have him through the electronic media and in our hearts. We're certain that despite the fact that we are physically apart, we're together in spirit and soul. And today we have our friend Julio Carvalho. Many of you have been here before, had a chance to hear him, know how knowledgeable and his work to disseminate the Spiritist movement here in the United States and in the world. And Julio is the coordinator of Center Spiritist in New Jersey. And he is the member of 3 states, which is the Federation in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut. He's one of the directors of that work, and he works he's a social worker, and he's always connected to the human side of things, but of everyday activities, but also in the spiritual perspective of this doctrine, wonderful doctrine. And we are, with our hearts, we receive him with care and love. And before we do that, we'll get together and have an opening prayer, thanking this very important moment for all of us. For all of you who feel comfortable closing your eyes, relax our mind and seeking the serenity that this environment allow us and our friends of the spirituality responsible for the work, Euripes Bassanufo and his collaborators that receive us, that embrace us, and give us the necessary peace that we all seek. And so, in this love, involved in this love of our spiritual friends, we get together our thoughts to seek Jesus, to bring him close to us, and tell him of our happiness of being here gathered in his name to study, to relive once more your teachings. And so, Jesus, with our hearts open to receive once more all of this love that your doctrine gives us, we thank you for this opportunity. And we ask of you that you can involve our friend Julio in your arms giving him the necessary intuition to so that we can have a speech not only at the verbal level, but it also can that we can absorb it into our hearts, so that we can have a seed that will grow into our lives. We thank you, Lord, for this opportunity. Thanking the good spirits, your messengers. We ask that permission to open the activities of this morning. So be it. So we're gonna now have Júlio Carvalho, a good friend.
Meus queridos amigos,
My dear friends of the Spiritist ideal,
que o Senhor encontre
we wish that the Lord find a good place in our hearts.
agradecer sempre
First, I want to thank you all
tão acolhedor e
for
carinhoso
this welcoming,
parte dos queridos amigos que nós temos aí em
for our
Massachusetts,
friends in
o
Massachusetts,
nosso querido Naú,
Naur, Flavio,
a própria Dirce,
Giusi, and others
eu não me recordo o
that
nome,
I don't remember names,
muito
but
obrigado,
that always
obrigado.
receives us so dearly.
Também
Thank you very
quero
much. And I want to present to you
o
our
reconhecimento àqueles que
thanks
estão
to
presentes
those
aqui
who are at the
presentes.
center.
Digo isto
I
sem
say this without any,
desserviço de opinião àqueles que estão em casa pelas razões óbvias.
it's
Mas
important to me
não
to
deixa de
recognize
ser
the
para
fact
nós,
that
digo nós dirigentes, estímulo
it's a stimuli
saber que as
to
pessoas
know that people are
com saudade
missing this gathering together and they are
presencialmente
happy to be physically at the center. This is very important to us
a
because
nossa
our
comunidade
community,
espírita
Spiritist community,
depende
depends on
desse
this connection, this link.
que a
So
tecnologia
obviously, technology, we are all very thankful for, gives us the ability to have this connection, but nothing replaces the getting together physically. It's like watch a fire on through TV and be looking at the fire in front of us. We feel the heat and we feel the warmth from everybody. So thank you very much for those who made the trip to the center. The subject chosen by our just this morning is anxiety and bitterness, grudge. They are enemies of the soul. We have 15 minutes and we try to synthesize as much as we can because the subject is very broad and has many facets, and therefore it requires from us a complete workshop, and even then we would not be able to cover the entire it's in its entirety. So the great problem with currently anxiety, which has many facets of depression, and when we talk about something that's covered by science of mental behavior, specifically psychiatry, we first look at what are the symptoms. So I'll cover it, but it's not for you to thinking that you would find those within yourself and conclude that I am suffer of anxiety or I am depressed. This is not the objective. The objective is for us to identify the causes of these problems from a spiritual perspective, because for science that has a complete work on this, and there's science from the earth for that. Spiritism itself didn't come to replace the science from earth. On the contrary, it came to it's to complement, supplement, because the cause and the solution finds itself in science in spiritual science, in the knowledge of the soul, ultimately. So, anxiety, let's start from that. And it's a major problem in this century. The calculation is that roughly in the United States, there is roughly 40 million people that suffer of anxiety. And anxiety presents itself as many facets, and there are people that understand anxiety in different ways. We'll try to explain very clearly what is that we're trying to say. Anxiety in the constant worry that something bad is going to happen soon. It's an imminent danger. And the imminence of the danger, there is all the alertness, biological alertness. And this biological alertness is a mechanism of defense developed through our body in contact with nature through thousands of years in which we were in the wildlife and the time that we evolved from the big apes and came to Homo erectus and Homo sapiens, our body evolved into a series of mechanisms to protect us. It's an instinct of self-preservation. So anxiety has its aspect primarily in terms of healthy aspect is to defend us, and this also has a pathological effect on it. It's the anxiety, for instance, a healthy anxiety that reminds us that we have to pay the rent at the end of the month. If you did not have any anxiety, the 31st would arrive and nobody will be worried about it. So that has consequences in our daily lives. The anxiety is the one that reminds us that our friend is arriving at the airport, that we need to depart to pick him up. Imagine if there's zero anxiety on that perspective. We would be home, our friend would arrive, and nobody would be waiting for him. So these aspects are naturally necessary and healthy. However, there is an aspect of it which is detrimental, that brings us into a unhealthy scenario. It becomes a pathological perspective. So the creature cannot no longer realize normal activities throughout the day, social ones or social and because anxiety itself prevents the person from going out and having normal life everyday life. So the person is constantly under anxiety, always concerned that something bad is going to happen, and always overestimate the possibility of something bad happen. So the person blocks and basically stationary, has no normal routine everyday activities. There is steps on the brake basically, and prevents from going out and being in contact with other people. And it's completely imaginary. It's something that could happen. Not really that's something that has reality. It becomes a pathological condition. The person is totally restricted by this overexcited imagination of something bad that could happen. This, therefore, should be analyzed, and we need to reflect on it to understand the causes of this condition, which is very pathological. And there are some criteria which psychiatrists and psychologists here in the United States, the social worker, for instance, the social worker here doesn't correspond to the one in Brazil, so it's very important to have this distinction. Social worker here does psychology, psychotherapy, psychologist is more relative to behavioral studies. So it is a complete different work that's in relation to what Brazil is, and the person is responsible for therapy and diagnostics, and there are some criteria behind it to understand if the person has this pathological anxiety condition. One of these criteria is to analyze the symptoms, and if these symptoms, it's very important, are persistent for more than 6 months, because the person experiencing a preoccupation with something that could happen and has an overexcited perspective on that preoccupation, if this state remains for more than 6 months, then it becomes a pathological condition. For instance, during this pandemic, those of us who were connected of information in media, there were um, in in informational channels, because the message originally was not to transmit the information but cause a state of panic in many moments. So soon to bring solution through medications, but maybe it goes undetected by the majority of us, how the industry here that controls the information and almost in many aspects in our lives. So we live in the illusion that the president of a country is the one that dictates the laws. The laws are really created by the legislative body and the Congress, and it is necessary for them to approve it to have something become a law. And these representatives are the people, those who constitute the legislative body, are many financed by the pharmaceutical industry. Things that we call bribes in Brazil, for instance, in the United States is somewhat legal. You go in a website in some federal member, and you can see the lobbyists behind it. So it's the people that work behind some industries. And the pharmaceutical industry, the second one in the United States, so that you can have an idea, the first industry, the largest industry is the war industry. The second one is the pharmaceutical one. And the third one is food industry. So these bodies of industry have the control of the media. They pass information that's necessary, that is in accordance to their financial interests. That's why it's necessary to have clear understanding of where you gather information, because it's not necessarily you're gonna get information that's the truth, but really have information that will cause profit. I don't know if you can notice this, but in a world without COVID-19, this is very clear. In the morning, you see information in the morning towards the old people, and throughout the ads, the subject is medication and medicine. And you have symptoms in such a way that in some of them you're gonna see yourself into it, and you're gonna find a solution into the medication that's being aired. So it's very necessary for us to see this perspective of everything that we're talking about. So you can have an idea. The industry in pharmaceutical makes more money with the food than with the people itself. So food, for instance, uh, let's say meat, you have many or hormones, and because they have a need for antibiotics, and that's because the pharmaceutical industry makes more money with the food industry, because to give medication to all of these animals, that we can have our needs met. and our body gets sick because of all of this. So this just to show the social context in which we are, and into this context we have a pandemic the way we have currently, and lots of information gets arrive without discernment and perspective, and this information is absorbed and becomes in a situation of panic, which is one of the varieties of the anxiety. So it's very natural that the person becomes anxious in a time like these that we live currently. But if we don't see any, if did not have the pandemic and the person goes into this state of anxiety, of intense preoccupation for more than 6 months, this becomes a pathological condition. All of this to explain to you, do not identify yourself as a person that's anxiety. I say this with a caution because it's very common for somebody to have the best intentions but without enough information about this aspect to cover something into the psychological science and behavioral science, the psychiatry, and immediately the people who are listening to it, they find themselves depressive or anxiety because they found themselves, they identify themselves in that situation, in that symptom. And the effect is exactly the opposite of what is the intention of this, the work. The work that we have here is to make you understand what's happening and to console. And the person leaves afraid that the person has depression and therefore will seek medication, and which is not advisable. So I'm not saying any of this that the medication is not appropriate, but I'll show you the symptoms. But please, this is just a little bit of information. It's not necessary for you to identify yourself with it. The word anxiety has as a synonym preoccupation. And preoccupation, what is it that it means? You look at pre, which means before, is the action of being involved into something, some work, some activity. So preoccupation becomes pathological because I am worried about something that did not yet happen. And if I find myself preoccupied before something that did not happen, and I am absent from the present of now, from the now. And the problem with this, the danger with this is that now, the moment now is happening, but psychologically, mentally, I am in this future that doesn't exist, that nothing guarantees it's going to happen according to my imagination, my overexcited imagination is planning for it. So what happens is that I lose time, I lose the present. And John Lennon said that life is that which happens when you are busy planning for the future. So this occupation before the present, this preoccupation, and life is constantly going by. And we have here the classic problem with the immigrant. It's not diagnostic, and the psychotherapists have a material to help with diagnosis, but we can here say that, extrapolate a little bit of it and say clearly the symptom of the immigrant, the person who is not psychological in the United States because they had her mind is in Brazil and not physically in Brazil. because physically is in the United States and life goes by. It's a state, pathological state. And it's a very easy for it to go through, and we don't perceive the fact that we have to live the moment in where we are, in this moment that God gave us. And which are some of those symptoms? People, we are constantly tired, very sensitive, very angry, constantly angry in the morning, the afternoon. If it's a day of sunshine, it's beautiful. Person complains about it, and if it's raining, same thing. And lack of sleep. All of these symptoms are eroding over time the resistance of the person, the psychological and physical resistance of the person, and the person ends up developing symptoms physically, symptoms in function directly related of the disturbance in psychological perspective. So the person starts to feel pains in the body. Over time, this increases and becomes more and more pathological. Masseuse won't help, and the person doesn't live the moment anymore. Is always concerned about the future, or bad things that could happen tomorrow, if the person's going to be employed or not. This steals the person the happiness. So all of us, from time to time, we can experience these symptoms, but what makes them a pathological condition is if we keep this for about 6 months. So please do not self-diagnose, because for for a doctor and the crazy person, we all have a little bit in us. So we should be very aware of it. It's just we want to cover the anxiety spiritual perspective. The anxiety can be classified in different types. We have the anxiety based off the panic, for panic, and the person wants to basically run, and it goes into the state of panic. And there is anxiety that is associated with fears. Person who is afraid of being in closed places, or fear of spiders. The person is in any place, in an enclosed place, and feels this panic, the emotional disturbance, which the person cannot be on that space. And sometimes see a very small spider and thinks it's a big spider, and it can't not be in any environment outside, because there's a function of this fear. We also have anxiety for uh, social fear, where the person cannot be in anywhere outside where there is people. If there is more than a certain number of people, the person cannot stand it. And can also be that this person is afraid of the judgment of other people. How are they going to see me? And therefore the person not even goes outside or be in contact with other people. And the anxiety, which is always constantly talked in the news, is the OCD, compulsive obsessive OCD. It's the person has a ritual to wash hands, for instance, to diminish the stress that it causes this anxiety. Some of you might be aware of people that have the want to clean everything constantly. The person cannot do anything if things are not absolutely completely clean. Obsessive compulsive disorder. And there is very classic cases in which there is even divorce, because one of the spouses took so much of the house that did not take care of the other spouse. We open a parenthesis here. I'm not saying that it's, I'm trying to show that there are cases that could happen in the world today in which we live with so distorted information. Everything we have to be very justified, and in fact we want to see what we want to say. So the person, for instance, loses her husband or spouse, and there is a mess with the sons and daughters, and it would be much better emotionally if the house was a mess and everybody was happy. The problem is the excess of all of this. And I'm certain one of us have a contact with somebody who knows somebody who was constantly cleaning, and he could not even go to bed until the house was completely organized. There is the PTSD, post-traumatic syndrome, post-traumatic syndrome. It's a moment in which the person experienced something very tragic, a car accident, some abuse physically or mentally, and now the person has emotionally locked at that moment in time. And we see that somebody abused sexually when I was 5, 6 years old, and I carried that stress of that experience throughout life. And I grow up with that until about 30 years old now, and all the images of that person, that the images don't leave my mind, and every single time I see somebody from that opposite sex, I project that image into the new people, and I prevent myself from new relationships, and I always uncomfortable with people around me because we don't have time. We can talk about the grudge, the resentment that I carry from that individual prevents me from living once again to live the present, to live my reality, current reality. I might be physically into August 22nd, 2020, but psychologically, I'm still at the moment in time in which that thing happened. So it's very bad for us, very negative for us, that PTSD. So the moment happened once, and I keep reminding myself of that moment in time, and I'm reviving that moment. I am giving power to that giving emotional power to that individual, that in spite of the fact that the individual no longer is present, I give him power to control my life, him or her. It's not clever for us to keep that bitterness, resentment, to keep that resentment. I'm not elaborate on this because anxiety already takes time from it. What are the causes of anxiety? So from materialistic perspective, according to science, opening yet another parenthesis, there are scientists, there are spiritualists. They believe that there is something beyond the body. But science officially doesn't believe in spirits, in God. It's a science, materialistic science. Seeks the causes of problems in the organization of the matter. Everything that happens to us becomes from matter, it's a reductionist science. If I have a problem in somebody of my body, then I'm gonna look at the cells, look at the organ, and until go down into always through matter in succession. So according to science, what would be the causes? Well, the structure of our brain would be one of those reasons. For instance, when we say about our evolution, portion of our brain is the limbic system. And into the limbic system, there is amygdala, and amygdala is a structure that prepares you for the dangers. So, if you are in front of a danger, so let's say when we see ourselves in front of a lion, we have to take something. Either we face the lion or we run from the lion. Whatever decision, our body has to be ready to handle it. So amygdala produces hormones, and GABA, which is one of them. It's a type of serotonin, and other neurotransmitters responsible for biological reactions, quick biological reactions, so that we can make a decision and act. So the person had a amygdala, overexcited amygdala, that could happen, that develops the anxiety because of it. Other scientists think that maybe the experiences of our lives brings us to anxiety. A person, for instance, that when he was a child, the house burned down and the person almost died, would carry that belief that in the future houses in which the person will live could also burn. So the person continues to live that trauma. So the experience of trauma could cause the anxiety state. And there is another aspect is the social aspect. We live today in a society which is very immediatist, very competitive, and we have to be the best on everything, and we have to gain, and we have to have, and not only that, but also we have the social media, which face confusion. In the old time, the person would be isolated in a small city and did not have many means to compare oneself with somebody else. And somebody who left the city would never, if the person didn't come back to the city, the person would, whoever's in the small city would not know how the person did socially, and the person will be without comparison. Whoever is living in this little city would not perceive it. But now that we have social media, it's very easy to compare yourself with somebody a friend, for instance, that studied, had a PhD and so forth, and complete different direction. And person was successful, and you within this perspective can compare oneself, and there is another, the envy comes through, and then anxiety to change one's life to have the same social level of somebody else, and we always live in the future, when something like this will happen to me so that I can be better than what I am as much as the other person is. So, and finally, the other cause from anxiety is this lifestyle of the person, because we're talking about in spiritism of spirits and perispirits, but we have to consider that the person is really, we are under the imperatives of a body, a biological element, as a biological machine, and because it's a machine, is subjected to chemical reactions. For instance, somebody who has lots of caffeine can find oneself in a state of anxiety. And opening here another parenthesis, when the pandemic arrived, many people very naively would say that through faith they would not get COVID-19. And believing on this was enough to, having faith would be enough to not fall sick. Nevertheless, COVID-19 has its mechanisms, biological mechanisms, and the body is a machine, it's a biological machine. So for these people, one of the
suas conquistas,
most respected person in the
Eurípides
Spiritist
Barçanufo.
movement is Euripides Barçanufo. And how did he passed
Sim, é
in
necessário
the
ter fé,
Spanish
mas
flu in
é
1914?
necessário
So it's necessary to have faith, but
atender
it's necessary for the person to
biológica do corpo.
attend to the biological necessities of the body.
De fato, não pegaram
And there are few who did
Covid-19,
not
porque se protegeram,
contracted COVID-19 because they
pelos
protected
mecanismos
themselves
aí apresentados pela ciência.
in
De fato,
accordance to science in general, but some
pegaram o
who
Covid-30.
got
O
COVID
Covid-30, a
30,
pessoa ficou em casa
COVID 30,
só
the person stayed
engordando,
home,
engordou
just
30 libras durante
the
essa pandemia.
person ended up
E é tão interessante
fattening up 30 pounds
para termos
because of the
saúde,
pandemic. It's
o que
necessary for us to be
significa
healthy.
alimentar-se bem,
We need to correctly
exercitar
uh,
e não ter
feed
estresse.
ourselves
E
to
muitos
exercise and diminish our stress level.
veículos de informação
And
de
some of
direita
the
com
panic media
interesses eminentemente
with
políticos
political
fez
perspective,
exatamente o contrário.
they
Mandou todo mundo se
exactly the
isolar,
opposite. They told everybody to isolate
as
themselves,
informações
watch
eram cada vez
information
mais
more
extremas,
and more,
não
which
podia
cause more and
fazer
more
estresse porque não
stress,
podia
no
exercitar,
go
e
outside, no
especificamente sobre
exercise, and the
qualquer
person
porcaria.
eating more than
Exatamente o
they should,
contrário
exactly
do
the
que o corpo
opposite of
necessita
what
para
the
ter saúde.
body
Eu
needs
lembro
to
que
be
quando,
healthy.
assim que
I
começou
remember
a
when
pandemia,
we
e
started,
foi
when the
aquelas primeiras
pandemic
2 semanas,
started, the first
ok,
2 weeks,
mercado,
go to the supermarket,
exercita,
buy the
porque
necessary,
talvez você precise,
because you might need
e
it.
ficar em casa por 2
We might
semanas.
need to stay home for 2 weeks.
Com grande surpresa,
And
quando
very
começou a ser
surprised when we went to the
permitido,
supermarket nearby.
chegamos
We got there,
e
and
o que digo, né? Tudo aquilo que é comida em aparência,
everything that
comida
was
dentro de uma
that
caixa,
came in
comida dentro de uma
food
caixa,
in appearance,
são
everything that comes into a
comidas
box or
processadas. O
in a
corpo
can
capacita-se
is
de forma
processed
naturalmente por
food,
mais de 2 bilhões de
and the
anos.
body is capable of
Comida
to
processada
feed
é algo bem
itself
mais difícil para o corpo,
um,
o
for
glúten,
2 million
a
years just
carboidrato,
fine.
a ácido
And
graxo. E
yet,
esta sessão de
everything that
supermercado
we
não
go
permite
through
você.
that supermarket
Antes você comprava
section, everything
sorvete,
was
você
gone.
comprava
No ice cream,
massa e
no
assim sucessivamente.
pasta, nothing.
Mas a área dos
But the
vegetais,
area
das
of the
frutas, estavam
vegetables,
todas
it was
como se
all
nada
there.
tivesse
If
acontecido.
nothing was
Por
related
quê?
to a pandemic.
Quando ali
When
você já
it's
tinha
right there
percebido
that you
o
take the
porquê que muitas
conclusion that
pessoas
many
adoeceram.
people got
Porque
sick,
já estavam
because it's
caminhando para o
already
precipício.
going to the
Bombardeando o
edge
corpo
of the
com todos
precipice,
esses problemas.
bombarding the body with all
E
of these problems. And
infelizmente
COVID just
estava à beira
pushes the
do
person
precipício.
from
O
that
organismo,
precipice,
mais uma
because the
vez,
body,
é
once
uma
more,
máquina
is a
de
machine that
ser
needs to
cuidada.
be cared
E
for.
uma
And
criatura
of
deve
course,
passar
somebody
por uma
that
intensa ansiedade. Porque sem Covid-19, uma
is
pessoa que
in that
vive
scenario, the
com
person lives in
ansiedade
lots of anxiety because the person already contributes by themselves towards
o fator
not being in a healthy
principal.
state. So let's go back to the
Porque
spiritual factor
falar
here,
dos
because to
setores
talk about
eminentemente materialistas não
the
atende à
imminent
necessidade do
materialistic
serviço
perspective, we need to have the
à classe
information
espírita. Por que
from
é tão importante
the
necessário?
spiritist
Porque a
perspective.
causa
Why is it
da
necessary for us to
felicidade
understand
é
these
o
causes? Because the
tratamento
cause,
certo. Então,
through the
quando uma
cause, we can
pessoa
understand what is it that is
materialista, qual é o
necessary
tratamento?
for a treatment.
O
From
tratamento é
materialistic perspective,
químico
what is the
e
treatment?
né,
Well,
estes
from the
neurotransmissores
body perspective, is a chemical
necessário
treatment. It's
recompensar,
necessary
tranquilizar a
to
excitação cerebral.
rebalance the
Isso
amygdala,
se dá
and it's
pelas
necessary to
benzodiazepinas,
take some of the
concretamente
benzodiazepines,
clonopin.
for instance,
Clonopin é um
clonopin,
medicamento
and it's a
que é
medication,
eminentemente viciável.
and it's something
Porque
very addictive. The
o
person
clonopin,
takes clonopin,
depois de
and
6 semanas,
about six
praticamente,
weeks,
já não consegue mais
person
ficar
cannot
sem.
no longer get rid
É
of it,
bastante
which is
interessante
very
por
interesting
esta
for
razão.
the
Porque
pharmaceutical industry,
ficará
because the
eternamente
person
dependente
will forever be
daquela
consuming that
substância.
medication, that
Porque,
substance.
veja só, a criatura às vezes toma
Because
a medicação
sometimes we take the medication to
antidepressante para
control the
não ter os
anxiety,
sintomas.
to not have the
Seja qual for
symptoms.
a causa da ansiedade,
Whatever
a
the
causa permanece
the
intacta,
cause is still
ainda
there, no
imperceptível,
longer perceived,
indescritível. Mas os
but the
sintomas, e
cause
às
and
vezes
this is
controlados
there, and the person
com
wants to
uma
control the
substância
symptoms
medicamentosa.
through medication.
E aí o que
And
acontece?
what happens?
Quer sair
person wants to no longer take the medication and wants to no longer feel the symptoms, but now has the anxiety of the collateral from the medication, side effects from medication. Now the person has the anxiety for not taking the medication. So the cause of the anxiety remain untouched, and psychotherapies and psychotherapy, materialistic psychotherapy will not really look at the central perspective of why the person has anxiety to begin with. And with all of these perspectives, I don't want to remove from the picture the materialistic therapies, but those by themselves are not enough. Why? Because Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, all physical, psychological uh, disturbances, they have a spiritual cause. So the person has anxiety for spiritual causes, and there can be many reasons for it. For the spirit, from the spiritist perspective, for instance, somebody who lives above the social, financial ability, the status, buy things that they don't they don't need to please somebody that they don't like. They are usually anxiety because they are afraid of losing what they have. There are folks who are afraid of death, and there is lots of anxiety related to this. In our profession, we see lots of folks. We are connected to a agency. Uh, uh, we work with a hospice, and in the hospice we assist psychologically the person that's gonna die or and the family, so that the person can pass away without pain and balance and in peace. And it's necessary to notice how much anxiety is around individuals in this around this subject. So the people do not understand clearly what is it that death is about, and because do not understand death, they want to live very intensely the moment, and they want to grab that. So it's lots of disturbances, and while the person needs all the psychological support, the family, very materialistic, they are fighting to see who will be the to inherit more of the person who is passing away. It's a very complex scenario. So the anxiety causes, spiritual causes, can have many roots. People who already made mistakes in some reincarnation before this one in a specific subject. Somebody who was facing a challenge of having to be honest, and facing with that, they can be in a very in a very anxious environment. And fear by itself is not the fear of death. Fear itself is a an unconscious remindness of all the promises that we made to ourselves of go back to the spiritual life, and death is coming towards us, and we are go back almost without accomplishing anything we said we would. So that we can relax a little bit, to relax a little bit. This is a little bit joke I'm going to tell her, so that we can relax a little. There was somebody who was very anxious. He was very jealous, and one day, because he worked a lot and wanted to have a very prominent social life, and he hired a private private eye to look at it, watch over his wife. So any person that comes to visit my wife, you call me immediately. And he went to work. Many days passed, and one day he got a call from the private eye. And because of this, because Peter said that heaven was very full of people, and he said that only people who have a very hard death would come in to heaven that day. So Peter said, he who has the worst death, maybe I'll let you come in. And then starts to tell the story of this man. Peter, I really died very badly because I suffered lots of anxiety, that I had so much anxiety that I hired a private eye to watch my wife, and he called me. He told me that he said somebody walked into my house and did not even ask him to tell me about the story. I rushed quickly to my apartment, and when I got there, I was so anxious to open the door, and I could not open the door. And I heard a noise inside, and I knew my wife was hiding something. When I finally opened the door, I saw the man dangling from the outside. I saw the guy dangling from the outside. I look at my wife, I look at the guy. I got the broom and I hit his hands many times and he finally fell. But I was so bad luck that he fell on top of a pillow, a truck full of pillows. He didn't die. That I was so anxiety, was so much anxiety that I threw the refrigerator, and the refrigerator killed him, and finally he died. And I look at my wife, and I had a heart attack because of my anxiety, and I died, and now I'm here. And Peter said, well, there was a different death. You can come in. And come the second guy. So how did you die? And see if you can come into heaven or not. Oh, I like very much to exercise, and this day there was a little calm day, and I started to exercise in the ninth floor of my building. I fell and I managed to dangle myself on the eighth floor, and a guy came, crazy guy came, and he started to hit me with a broom, and I fell on top of a truck full of pillows. But he was not happy with that. He threw a refrigerator from the eighth floor, and I died. So Peter said, oh, this is a very hard death. You can come in. And the third guy, totally lost. What happened to you? I have no idea. I am here to understand how I died. What do you mean? I couldn't. What happened? I got a call from a woman in the morning to fix something. I got to the person of that woman. She told me it was the refrigerator. And she was so anxious that I fixed that quickly. And all of a sudden she started, it's my habit, it's my husband. And it pushed me inside the refrigerator. I walked into the refrigerator and I felt the refrigerator moving. Finally, the refrigerator felt the refrigerator fall, and I have no idea how I died, but here I am. So this is to have a little bit of humor, a little bit of how anxiety can be bad for all of us throughout our lives. We spiritists have plenty of information that's the antidote for anxiety and all the other these psychological diseases. This Spirit's book, we look at we look at now the current days very afraid. Now the pandemic, we see I will watch all the news, I will watch all the Netflix, I will watch YouTube, and very rarely I'm gonna reread Spirit's book. I'm gonna reread the Gospel according to Spiritus. It's not necessary to have the label of Spiritus. It's necessary to have the effort to rethink and feed ourselves the spiritual um, yeah, and anxiety seems to take over because we don't have enough into ourselves to help overcome these difficulties. In the Spirit's book, Allan Kardec tells us that in that the people who think about it, who embody that, have three possibilities.
Primeiro, o destemor da morte.
They will be not afraid of death anymore,
Tolerância para com as faltas
tolerance with difficulties of others, because the person identifies oneself, how hard it is to have
E o terceiro,
modify one's behavior and
resignação perante
understand ourselves. And the third is the resignation in front of our problems. We understand that it only happens to us that which is best for us.
a situação.
Whatever situation we are in, we can be in peace, carrying the conviction, absolute conviction that we are here to be educated, and we are really to receive lessons that will help us, that cannot bring us immediate happiness, but can bring us the peace, because it's the fulfillment of our duties, because we will be associating our souls with the God, Jesus teachings, because that's why he said happiness is not of this world, because we are here in spiritual growth and into our spiritual childhood. We want things to be the way we want them to be, which is not going to take us to true happiness. But if we fulfill our duty, we can find peace and we can push aside anxiety and depression. And with that, we can make our lives and those around us happy. So thank you very much for the opportunity and the presence of you all. Thank you so much.
Obrigado, Júlio,
Thank you, Julio,
pelas palavras tão sábias, pelo
for
humor,
the sense of humor,
o lado profissional, a descrição
for the
muito da situação
professional
profissional,
perspective.
esclarecedor.
It's very enlightening.
A dona Didi já se encontra lá no centro.
Dona Jess is already at the center, and she's gonna close with a final prayer.
Mais uma vez,
Dear friend Julio, once more, we thank you
suas palavras,
for your words,
conhecimentos.
for your perspective, and the material to think.
Aqui agradecidos
So we want to,
que possa te amparar
we're here very thankful to Jesus, and we ask that He can support you in this
comunidade, como na
in this work you do in the spiritual perspective, and we hope that soon we can have you here physically,
se matar as
and
verdade. Então nós agradecemos mais uma vez
we thank you once more
carinho pela
for the dedication, for the work
nos trouxe.
that brings us this wonderful
E assim nós vamos agradecer
material from today, and we thank Jesus once more
tudo que temos
for everything we have received in His name,
os amigos
for the
espirituais que nos amparam
spiritual friends who take care of us, who support us in
nosso Pai,
all the moments. That God
caminhos, os fortalecer
can open our path and keeping our strength in front of life and difficulties, that we can remind ourselves that we're never alone, that Jesus, our Lord, is with us, and God, our Father, knows what is best for all of us. May the presence of Jesus be with our lives. So be it.
Muito obrigado a todos.
Thank you for all
Nós estamos encerrando
very
a
much,
transmissão ao
and
vivo e o
we'll
pessoal
finish our
presente
live
no
transmission.
coletivo.
And
Obrigado, Júlio. Tenha uma
thank you,
ótima
Julio.
manhã.
Have a
Tchau.
good morning. Bye bye.